So welcome to this session of the Qualitative Methods Masterclass webinar series. This series of webinars is sponsored by International Institute for Qualitative Methodology, University of Alberta, and ATLAS.ti, Software for Qualitative Data Analysis. I am Neringa Kalpokaite, Manager of International Projects of ATLAS.ti, and I will just introduce a few technical concepts we need to know about this presentation before we start. This presentation will be conducted through GoToWebinar, system for web conferencing. So if you happen to get disconnected from this session, what do you have to do? You just have to click again on the link you received from GoToWebinar and you will come back. If, for example, the presenter disconnects, she will do exactly the same thing. But in that case, we will need to be patient because it takes a few minutes for her to come back. But I'm sure that none of this will happen today and we will have a successful meeting. So we are very happy to have today with us Dr. Brohotov. Oh my God, sorry for confusing how to pronounce your name. Dr. Brohotari, who will present for about 30 to 45 minutes. After that, she will take questions. So during her presentation, I will have all your microphones muted in order to avoid background noise and echo, okay? But after the presentation, she will be more than pleased to receive all your questions. So how you have to ask me if you want to ask a question to the presenter, just to click on the hand icon we have in our control panel. So just to double check that you can hear me correctly, please, all of you, if you can find this button, which looks like as a hand icon, click on it, and I will understand that you can hear me correctly. I see Yaki, Han, David, Catherine, great. So I see that you're following me and everything works correctly. And now I am going to give the microphone to Yvette Makwat, Program and Event Coordinator of International Institute for Qualitative Methodology, and she will introduce today's presenter. So Yvette, I will give the microphone to you right now, and the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Neringa. Dr. Kakali Bhattacharya is an Associate Professor and Program Coordinator of Qualitative Research Graduate Certificate at the Kansas State University. Her research interests include contemplative and decolonizing epistemologies, ontologies, pedagogies, and methodologies. She focuses on creativity and inquiry and transnational issues of race, class, and gender in higher education. She has published widely, including articles in Qualitative Inquiry, International Journal of Qualitative Studies in Education, Cultural Studies, and Critique Methodologies, International Review of Qualitative Research. She has book chapters on various methodological and pedagogical aspects of qualitative research in enhancing qualitative and mixed methods research with technology and academic knowledge and construction and multimodal cultural development or curriculum development. Qualitative Inquiry as Global Endeavor, Higher Education Handbook of Theory and Research, and Arts-Based Research and Education, Foundations for Practice. Additionally, she has 3 books due to come out in late 2016 and early 2017, titled Conducting Qualitative Research, a Practice Guidebook, Creativity and Qualitative Research, Possibilities in Graduate Education, and Power, Race, and Higher Education, a Cross-Cultural Parallel Narrative. Currently, she's exploring the role of contemplative approaches to social justice work and healing practices. Dr. Kelly, we're very happy to have you here with us here today.
Thank you very much, Yvette. Dr. Bhattacharya, I'm going to make you as a presenter right now, and at the same time, I'm giving the microphone to you, so just I need a minute to make it happen. Here you go. You must receive a message saying, would you like to become as a presenter? And as well, I'm giving you the microphone in a second. So the microphone is yours.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Yes. And you can see my screen?
Yes, perfectly fine.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and apologize if my name was difficult to pronounce. The first name is pronounced as Kakali. It's like broccoli, but you say it with a K. If you have problems with that, I respond to Queen, so you can call me that. My last name is Bhattacharya. So today what I wanted to do as, and for the next little bit, is to talk about 3 areas of my work that have really informed what I'm doing. And these 3 areas are work in art-based research and contemplative practices, and in doing critical work that informs qualitative inquiry. And I kind of want to break down each one of these areas a little bit. And then I want to show you some examples from my work where I have brought them back together, all 3 of these areas, to see how they have interacted and taken form in the work. Key to all 3 of these areas and the work that I have done is to really make sure that there is an embodied piece in each of these work, so that the work is not completely abstract or completely philosophical or completely esoteric or theoretical. Not that those are bad things to do, but for me it had been more meaningful to have a bridge between those theoretical, philosophical, esoteric positions and embodied experiences, and then the technicality of methodology, you know, to do methodological work, to do qualitative work. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the arts-based research, which is creativity as inquiry, is how I use arts-based research. So in doing that, in doing arts-based research and in doing creativity as inquiry, what I generally do for that is I consider creativity as this sort of opening. It's like a portal. And within that portal, you take a journey. So if you have, you know, a problem, or you are working on a project and you want to imagine how to approach this creatively, then that becomes a way to expand your thinking. That becomes a way to think beyond the restrictive boundaries that might be presented to you or you might have imagined. So it becomes an invitation, it becomes an opening, it becomes a journey through a portal that then allows people to take these journeys and gather insights that they may have otherwise not had. Now, I will tell you this, that when I speak to people, especially students, and say that creativity is something that we can all engage in, a lot of students would say to me that I don't have a creative bone in my body. I absolutely don't have a creative bone in my body. And I think that is a reflection of how much over the years we have stomped out creativity and creative thinking as if that is not something valuable, as if that is something you would do for fun or as a hobby, or unless you're just a gifted painter or an artist, that's the only way you're creative, you know. So I think we've isolated creativity to some very specific type of representation, and we haven't thought of creativity as a way of thinking, as a way of problem solving. I think the people who are engaged in creativity think that way, but I think the people who are outside of it, you know, within qualitative research and other social science fields, feel that creativity is not something that is of value, or that, you know, there are certain established ways of doing things and we have to stay within the realms of that. So I kind of break tradition with that, and I invite people to think creatively and move creatively through their work. So that's kind of where creativity as an inquiry, creativity as a portal of journeying comes through. In the background of the slide, there's a lot of different creative work that I have done. So what I'm going to do is, as we go through, I'm going to pull up some of these pieces to show you, you know, what I'm talking about. Now, and I did mention that creativity could be many things. So in this picture over here, I have kind of placed some types of creativity. However, I will tell you that this is just scratching the surface. So an arts-based research can be a research project that you're engaging in through some sort of creative thinking. So that means that you have a creative way of approaching the project. So you are thinking about it, imagining it, bringing in beliefs, assumptions, values that are grounded in the assumption that creativity is a way of knowing. Creativity is a way of being. Creativity is a way of thinking and designing a study. And then creativity is a way of analyzing the data and representing the data. But I think a lot of times when people think about arts-based research, they only think about the output. So they only think about the painting or the poems or the mixed medium art or the photography or the ethnodrama or the creative writing, that's whether it be autoethnographic writing or creative nonfiction or social fiction. People think that the output is the only part of the arts-based research, but it's not just the output, it's also the way of thinking, it's also the way of being. So it's the epistemology, it's the ontology, it's the methodology, and any and all of those things can be considered creatively and using creativity as an inquiry. All right, so the next piece of this that I want to explore a little bit further is contemplative practices. Now, in qualitative research, people engage in these practices anyway, in some way or the other, but perhaps they don't always label it as such. So the way I understand contemplative practices is these deep first-person introspective journeys and inquiries, and within these introspective journeys and inquiries, there are insights to be found. And so the Association of Contemplative Mind in Higher Education had done this qualitative study, and they had gone around and asked faculty members who are engaged in contemplative practices in terms of what kind of practices do they do in their classrooms to teach whatever it is they teach. So these were multidisciplinary faculty. So they were in science and engineering and social science and humanities and education. So they were in various different areas and disciplines, and based on their understanding, based on their experiences, based on how they reported back, they categorize the findings in the form of this tree that you see. So they, and I understand that in some spaces in qualitative research, a tree structure seems a little too linear and hierarchical, but I would invite you to not read this tree in that manner, but to read it as, you know, maybe as a rhizome, to read it as something that doesn't always have this defined center from where everything emanates, but it has multiple interconnected spaces, you know, that move, that through which awareness moves in and out of, you know. So they saw it as a tree, but it can be reconceptualized in other ways as well. So they saw it that, you know, the people who engage in contemplative practices bring a sense of heightened awareness, and have a sense of self and community, and self and connection to community, self and relationship with community. And the practices are some of the ways in which they cultivate this awareness, they cultivate this introspection, they cultivate this deep inner journeying. So as you can see, there are relational practices. So the relational practices are dialogue, deep listening, storytelling, journaling, counsel circle. And as you can see, some of this are things that we already engage in qualitative research. We just don't term it that way, or we may not have put an awareness to it in that way. And then there are creation process practices. Then there is art and, you know, mandala and music and singing and chanting, and some, you know, some areas of qualitative research that may be appropriate and some that may not be. Then there are ritual and cyclical practices, there are movement practices, stillness practices, generative practices, activist practices. And as you see this, you'll probably find your research in some aspect of this branching and not in other aspects of it. And that's all right. It's just an idea of how people had engaged with contemplative practices in their own work. You may have another branch that is not here, or you may have a branch that is a combination of some of these, you know, as well. So that's why I said that the tree structure is a temporary structure to give us a framework to talk about it, but it can be reconceptualized as other structures as well. So this is the critical portion of my work. The critical portion of my work is informed by decolonizing scholarship. So I look at decolonizing work from a global South perspective and from a transnational perspective. Other people's critical work obviously will be different and will vary. Gloria Anzaldúa has been extremely informative and influential in my work. Linda Tuyai-Smith is a Maori indigenous scholar who had written a very powerful book called Decolonizing Methodologies in 1999 that absolutely changed, the way I understood everything, absolutely everything. The way I understood research, the way I understood methodology, the way I understood making sense of things, making, reporting studies, everything. It absolutely really altered all the different ways in which I understood research. And then I use a lot of global South scholars to inform my decolonizing agenda. And then the thing that I mean when I think of decolonizing is that the world has a really long history of various types of colonizing experiences. People from other countries have gone to different places and invaded those spaces, invaded the country's history and treasures and people, and put a lot of atrocities on those people. And then in some cases, the colonizers settled in with those that they colonized, and in other cases, the colonizers have left the spaces in which they previously occupied. But what had happened in the process is that the way of the colonizer had become so privileged that even the colonized started thinking that the way of the colonizer is the normal way, is the civilized way, is the accepted way, is the way that we should all thrive to be. And it bleeds into our infrastructures. So it bleeds into our education, it bleeds into our schools, it bleeds into our research agendas, it bleeds into our curriculum, so it bleeds into our economy. So it bleeds into so many of our social structures. And in research, it bleeds into the ways in which we understand research, the ways in which we engage in relationship with the participants in qualitative research, the ways in which we write about the research. Simple things like I research on, that's a very colonizing way of thinking about things. It's I research with, to see your participants as co-participants, co-researchers who are just as agentic as you are. And I mean, that's probably a very fundamental concept, and most people know about that, but that's a very clear example of doing decolonizing work or thinking in decolonizing ways. Now, my framing of what I do is through a post-oppositional framing. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk about what that post-oppositional framing is and where I situate myself within the framing. But what I have been beginning to think about is when we engage in social justice work as qualitative researchers and as educators and social science researchers, what ends up happening is that we have to engage and witness some pretty oppressive stuff and figure out what would be the best way to resist and chart an agenda towards liberation. And sometimes that's very, very, very spirit training. And oftentimes, some of that energy could be locked in an oppressor-oppressed binary relationship. So a best way to think about that would be to think about Audre Lorde's work, where she did it, where she spoke in The Sister Outsider that the master's tools cannot break the master's house. So if we imagine that we are inside the master's house and we are equipped with the master's tools, then what are we planning to do with these tools? Do we plan to break down some walls in the master's house so that we have more of the house? Do we plan to somehow appeal to the power centers and the people in positions of power or the agents of oppression, that they be more benevolent in their oppression? So sometimes our agency and our power and our energy and our labor is tied up in this agenda of oppressed binary, where we're still somehow meeting the oppressor's agenda even in our resistance. And so what has happened as a result of that is a lot of spirit draining, a lot of energy draining, resources draining. People feel battle fatigue, you know, and so this has sort of prompted me to think, like, how do we, and so then this is where the creative thinking comes in. How do we imagine developing an agenda of liberation and freedom and equality and equity and dignity and humanity for all if we don't get into the oppressor-oppressed binary and we sever the relationship with power centers? What if we try to imagine what this would look like? So in doing so, I had come to the space for post-oppositionality, and Alois Keating had sort of framed this post-oppositionality, which is kind of derived from works of Gloria Anzaldúa. So she says that I enact the post-oppositional theorizing that I call for to interrogate some of the diverse forms that binary oppositional thought can take while resisting the very strong temptation to react oppositionally. I aspire to offer viable additions and alternatives to the oppositional forms of consciousness and politics that currently drive social justice theorizing, activism, and academic disciplines. I develop non-oppositional theories and relational methods that insist on a realistic politics of hope and possibility of a planetary citizenship. So I kind of come from that kind of framing to understand the social justice work that I do so that I don't feel completely drained in my resources when I engage in this work. So if I find that I'm engaging in the work and it feels like I'm banging my head against the wall, then I realize I'm doing the work in the master's house. So then I have to start imagining what is outside of the house going to look like. What if I sever this relationship and begin to build a community of people that are lined up with this agenda, and we bring towards change without having to bang our heads against the wall. So the other thing that Alois Keating does is she sort of tells us that what ends up happening with this oppositional work is that it's not only energy draining, but it creates fragmentations in our being. So she talks about that by saying that our internal fragmentations, our intra-division, as if it were, have their source at least partially in the oppositional energy and the dichotomous thinking behind them that the groups use to combat social oppression. We can't turn off the negative energies once we remove ourselves from the battlefield. We take these energies with us into our work, our homes, our minds, our bodies, our souls. They eat away at us, devouring us as we direct this oppositional thinking at one another and at ourselves. We fragment, we crumble, we deteriorate from within, and then we regroup, we begin again, and on to the next corrosive battle. So this is sort of my motivation to frame our thinking from a post-oppositional onto epistemology so that I'm not in a battle fatigue situation continuously. So if I pull together the 3 C's, creativity, contemplative approaches, and criticality, this is where I have landed. So where I have landed is this space to cultivate deep awareness, because of the oppositionality sometimes creates so much fragmentation within ourselves that I feel like sometimes we're at war with ourselves when we deplete our own inner resources. So some of the ways to then resource ourselves further and restore ourselves is cultivating that awareness of that depletion and cultivating a stillness within ourselves and understanding our relationship with self, different parts of ourselves, different fragmentations within ourselves, and our relationship with other. And this other can be the participant you're working with, or a group of participants you're working with within qualitative research, or it can also be the oppressor or agents of oppression. And sometimes to do that, we also have to do some shadow work, which is kind of the third picture of the jungle with a figure going inside the deep jungle over there. So And then shadow work generally involves looking at the parts within ourselves and our understanding and our consciousness where we might not want to go easily, where we might feel that it's difficult to go, where we might feel that this might bring up difficult issues, difficult conversations, stuck places, and sometimes it's through that journey that we find the deeper treasures, the deeper insights. And such journeys can take place through a lot of different things, and some of that journey can take place through creativity, through either engaging in creative practices or contemplative practices, or writing a poem or drawing a picture or whatever that is. But whatever way you make this work intelligible to you then becomes a literacy. So I've termed this thing called shadow literacies, and I have sort of identified some of the literacies I've cultivated in doing the shadow work. Another part that comes together for me through these 3 C's, creativity, contemplative approaches, and criticality, is witness consciousness. So witness consciousness means that you're bearing a witness to people's experiences, including bearing a witness to your own experiences as well, to your own reaction, to your own understanding, to your own resistance, to your own excitement, and to other people's experiences, understanding, resistances, and excitement as well. So that if you have a witness consciousness, then you are doing the researcher work, but you're also being researcher as an observer as well, observer of self and observer of other. And this witness consciousness then creates this deep understanding of compassion and empathy, because if you have that understanding of self, then you have that understanding of others. And some of that then comes and invites creativity, as this expansive space, because when you are still, when you have done some of the shadow work, when you are witnessing yourself in relations with others, and you're witnessing others in relationship with each other, and broader society, you're expanding your thinking, you are thinking creatively, you are thinking beyond what might have been traditionally taught to you, and that creative space of thinking and being then brings about creative expressions, whatever that might look for you in your own spaces. So I just want to quickly take us, we have about less than 10 minutes. So in this last few minutes, I want to take us on a journey of some of the work that I have done that integrates the 3 C's. And then you can ask me more questions about the work or anything else I have spoken of ahead of time to lead into this work. So this is the work that I had done in my dissertation. And in my dissertation, I created an ethnodrama. And in that ethnodrama, I looked at students from India who were in their first year of graduate studies in the US to look at their experiences. And as a result of their being in a different country in their first year, they were able to identify things that were different and looked different or weird or off to them. And usually that became indicators of, social structures, hidden curriculum, identity issues. A lot of them lost a ton of privileges once they crossed the oceans and didn't realize that those privileges were lost. So they were continuously in a place of unknown struggle. So this ethnodrama that I created was an ethnodrama that was done through Goffman's front and backstage figuration, but I expanded the front and backstage figuration to include multiple front and back stages, with the argument that the ways in which we perform in each of these spaces depends on not only who the audience is in that space, who we feel safe, what the power relations are in that space, but also how we understand our performances in other spaces too. So it was very interconnected, very rhizomatic in the way I did that work. And I created the ethnodrama as if we were going to be performing it with program biography and characters and scenes and script and all of that work. And it was driven by decolonizing work as well. Soon after the ethnodrama that I created, I ended up working on some poems. So what I did was the participants engaged in photo elicitations. And so they took pictures during their time of the study about things that stood out to them of their experiences in the US. As a result of the pictures that they shared with me, when they shared the pictures, they had narratives to go along with the pictures. So what was very helpful about that experience was that I didn't have to come up with any type of question on my own. So it was very participant driven. So they were sharing what they thought would be helpful. So what I did first was I looked at words that they have shared with pictures and created a found poem based on using their words and only their words. And that has been published in the piece that I have cited underneath. And then a few years later, I wrote a poem where I looked at places where there was silence in their work and in their words. And in asking something, if they either evaded it, or if there was a silence, or if I read something as a silence, then I, sort of went deep into the silence and tried to write poems about where there were silences. And then I looked at, like, what does this type of poetic inquiry reveal to me about this group of students, about their experiences, and about qualitative research and arts-based inquiry, the intersection of qualitative research and arts-based inquiry. The next kind of thing that I did was called Cirque du Soleil's Acrobatics of Transnational Female Academic. And if there are French-speaking people here, please forgive my French pronunciation. I don't know if you can see this, I kind of blew this up, but this is a negative image of my face, and on my face is the map of the world, and it's actually in the publication. This image is in the publication. So what I did was I actually created an ethnodrama, but I imagined I had, so remember I was saying, like, if we can have imagination without restrictions. So I imagined I had the budget of a Cirque performance, like a Cirque du Soleil performance. And so I had described this, the stage that was a hydraulic stage that could move up and down. There could be water, there could be a pool in the stage. And my character, who I call Brownie in the stage, didn't have any words. She was silent, she was moving. She had been meditating on the stage. She had been drowning in the water with this huge book of evidence-based inquiry and scientific evidence, like, dumping on her head, and she's drowning. She's moving between flags of different countries that she has either lived in or has, national identity tied with. And when she moves between those flags, she's on a trapeze swing, and each country she flies to has their national anthem playing. So this really took me to a very different place where I described my experiences as a female academic who's a brown academic in predominantly white space, and how acrobatic you have to be to navigate that space, and what does that mean when you often are working through many spaces of silence imposed and chosen. So that was what I was doing with that. This was sort of a creative nonfiction piece that I wrote, and it's a relatively recent piece. And in this piece, I denoted the relationship sometimes we have within academia is very similar to working with Royal Bengal tiger in the same boat. So in other words, as somebody who is in a traditionally underrepresented group within academia, some of the times what ends up happening is the infrastructure in academia is not designed to support people who are traditionally underrepresented. So when you have to work within the power structure, you have to understand that there has to be an interest convergence for things to go well. And in this movie, the Life of Pi movie, this boy was stranded in the middle of the ocean with this tiger, and his survival entirely was dependent on feeding fish to the tiger. And if he didn't feed fish to the tiger, then he was dinner. And oftentimes feeding fish to the tiger came at a deep cost to him, and even when he thought the tiger was his friend, the tiger was not completely his friend. It was the tiger would still growl at him and come at him. So I think, in this piece, I tried to unpack some critical autoethnographic narratives, to look at academic structures that eventually, to work within them, there is only to find infrastructure. Now, a colleague of mine says, can the tiger be converted into a nice little cuddly kitten? That would be that imaginative, creative thinking, that the tiger could be converted to kitten, converted into butterfly, converted into anything you want. And of course, and if you want to think post-oppositionally and imagine that and work towards an agenda like that, I think that would be helpful too. I don't know how to imagine that, but I imagine that for some other people that could be possible. This was a mixed medium painting that I did, and I didn't intentionally start out to make this a research. I was moving from Texas to Kansas, and my window in Kansas, and my office in Kansas didn't have a window. So I just wanted to have some artwork that looked like a window. So I had a friend of mine with whom I was in a meditation group, and she was an art therapist and an artist. So I asked her if she'd help me make a sort of an artwork that looked like a window. So we got this mirror that was shaped like a window, and she told me to bring objects from the house that meant something to me, and we started painting objects and layering the paint with all sorts of things. And as we did that, I moved in and out of tons of stories around the objects. And then when we were doing this, I realized, like, oh my God, this is becoming an autoethnographic mixed medium contemplative art piece. So I started like documenting various stages of the art making. So in this QSC article that I have, those stages are documented if you wanted to go take a look at that. But the reason why I say sari stories is if you see the red that is moving through, that's actually crepe paper, and we painted on top of the crepe paper, and it began to show up as a sari for me. And so when it moved through different borders and cross borders and moved outside of the frames, it began to frame these stories that, that inform the various stages of my life and within and outside of academia, that allows me to understand race and gendered and transnational identity. And so then this became like a mixed medium autoethnographic piece for us. Currently, I'm engaging in this contemplative art space mixed medium project with my students. And in this project, what I'm doing is my students, similar to that front and back stage piece that you saw in my dissertation, I give my students a paper bag, and they have two sides of the bag, the front and the back side of the bag. And the front side of the bag, they denote what they represent of themselves as they show up in their research spaces as qualitative researchers, as human beings, as critical thinkers, as engaged researchers. And on the back side of the bag, they represent, through whatever means they can, what they don't show, what they hide. And students don't have to reveal the backside to anybody unless they want to. And then they did ethnographic projects with each other with their front and back sides of the bag. Inside the bag, they put paraphernalia that are connected to their critical milestones, research projects, research interests, anything that they deem to be important. And then they, subjectivities, privileges, and then they do a ethnographic project. So in this class, this ethnographic project was really well received. So I interviewed the students as a result of the experience, and then we started doing like a mixed medium arts-based analysis method that I developed, which is a pretty long method. In class, we took a full 3 hours to do it, and once I interviewed the students, I took their interview transcript and I analyzed the data at home, and it took me about 6 or 7 hours to do it. It's kind of collage making where I'm layering, various different things on top of each other, including interview transcripts, artistic representation, paint, coloring, objects. So you can see some of that in the pictures over here. And this was one of the final products that came out of the data analysis of one of those interviews, where this was a student who was adopted, and he was a Korean student, and his adopted mother was Chinese and his adopted father was white. And he ended up realizing that through so much of his life, he had wondered about his identity, and ended up aligning so much of his identity with his father's side, which is the white side, because to hide from the kind of pain that came from understanding the oppression a minority part of his cultural heritage might be facing, but it's not something he could completely hide from because it was always in the background. And so some of the things over here, the middle eye sort of popped up as a result of doing this work. I started doing this work and then pasting things and then looking at where the most salient pieces of data was. And then I drew an outline, and next thing I know, it looked like an eye. And then on the left-hand side, I was drawing the Korean flag and just putting transcripts on top of that he had said about it. And I kind of left it like that. And covered the rest of it up, and that now looks like an eyeball. So it was a very contemplative, organic piece of it, and once I showed it to him, it generated even more conversation, so it became a very generative practice as well. So before questions, before the discussion portion of it, these are some of the questions with which I am thinking about my work. So what are the impossibilities of the relationships that we engage in our research? How do we think expansively, creatively, imaginatively, without being restricted about possibilities of freedom and agency? What are our internal fragmentations that inform our epistemologies? And what do we struggle to accept ours? And what arises if we cultivate stillness in our inquiry? And what arises if we cultivate witness consciousness in our inquiry? And the last one, and it's a loaded one, and I'd asked this question in my dissertation, and I continue to ask it today, is what if we give up our will to know as researchers? What would we know then? So that's my presentation today. Any of the work that I've cited, if you go to researchgate.net and type my name in there, most of the full text pieces of what I have cited today should be available there. So I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kakali, for your amazing presentation. And it's great that we have all 15 minutes before we end for questions. So I would like to ask you, my dear participants, if you have questions, comments, what you have to do, just click on the hand icon that you can find on the control panel, and I will open your microphone. So you will be able to speak directly with Dr. Kakali. Let me see if we have questions. We have many participants today. There were more than 140 participants registered, and right now we have many of them connected today. So let's see who would like to ask a question. I will give a minute, and I will double check as well our common chat group if someone have written his or her question here. No. And another place, neither. So please, let's take advantage and let's talk and discuss, reflect on what we have learned. Rosalind, I see that she's writing something, so I will open her microphone. Here you go. Rosalind, your microphone is open right now. Would you like to ask a question? Rosalind?
Hello, Dr. Kakali. Thank you. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Thank you very much for the very informative presentation. I think I just wanted to clarify on your ResearchGate profile. Did you have a publication regarding your recent work about the process and particularly about the mixed method analysis approach that you just discussed?
Yes. If you look at the qualitative this article, you can still see my screen, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so if you look at research grade, this article will be there, and that process of mixed method analysis is in there. Now, I'm working with a student to write a book called Creativity in Education. It's Creativity in Education, and that's this process over here. That is a more layered process of how to take interview data and how to publish all of that. And so that process, that is in the process of getting published. And I also have another article that I had written for International Review of Qualitative Research, which is currently in press. So it hasn't been published yet, but it should be published anytime now. It's been accepted and it's gone into some sort of black hole of in-press space, but it will emerge itself soon. And this process is also documented there.
Thank you very much. As well, we have another person whose name is Kahdeidra. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing well. I will just open your microphone because I see that you want to ask a question. The microphone is opened. Kahdeidra, Martin, can you hear us? I see that your microphone is muted by yourself. Would you mind to unmute the microphone? Yeah.
Okay. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, good morning. Thank you very much. I'm really interested in the contemplative practices that you mentioned, and in particular, you mentioned the shadow work. And I'm interested in, I want to know if you have, if you have any, anything to say about, or if you thought closely about shadow work in relation to scholars who are from indigenous religious traditions. That is a particular, this is a context of, of Judeo-Christian dominance, in schools. And I was wondering, as somebody who's a member of of African descended religion tradition, Haitian Voodoo, I'm really interested in the experience of students, who are from these like kind of demonized religions. So I just wonder if you had something, like if you knew of like other scholars who are particularly doing work on that, or you yourself, like if there's something that you had to say about, like kind of the importance of that work for those scholars and for those students.
That's actually a really good question, and I so appreciate you asking me that. So, indigenous work and decolonizing work is tricky because what decolonizing looks for an indigenous community in Canada or in the US would not be the same as what would look for a decolonizing agenda in West Africa, or a decolonizing agenda for the people that I'm connected with, which is a very transnational group of people from India, so I tend to stay in my lane, like I tend to not try to speak towards any other tradition, because I feel like I would only do that if I have been invited into that space by a cultural elder or a cultural insider who would then engage me, and we would exchange information and share ideas and insights. But beyond that, I try not to even intellectualize other traditions, only because I feel like it's a sacred space and I want to honor that. Now, having said that, people are doing some of that kind of shadow work in other cultural traditions that I do know. My attempt of shadow work comes from understanding that so much of the darkness that we carry, or the unwillingness to look at certain parts of ourselves, or the fear at looking certain parts of ourselves, or the stuck places that we come to when we do our research, are also spaces of light and illumination, so that I don't demonize the darkness as a bad thing, or I don't demonize that which is dark or black or cloudy or foggy to be a bad thing. I do take that to look at invitations of deep insights and collective insights sometimes even. So within the Indian tradition, and this is also true for plenty of other traditions, there are traditions of the shamans, and so the shamanic journey is this journey of, it has its own initiatory ordeals where you have to completely fall apart, look at all the things that are breaking apart within you, and then journey into wherever they're taking you, and then come back and put that back together with renewed insights and understanding. And that can then be shared with others who might benefit from that. And so that's generally sort of a structure of shamanic journey that I've seen within Asian cultures, within African cultures, within South American cultures, Russian shamans as well. Gloria Anzaldúa talks about it as well, and as you know, very influenced by her work. So sort of that's the kind of journey that I have been through, and I've begun to write about that in terms of, the vulnerability with which you would have to do the work, the ways in which you would understand your own stuck places, fear places, and how would you do that work. And so in one of the work that I have done, I have actually, and it's published in Cultural Studies, Critical Methodologies, I've actually written a letter to my 6-year-old self from my current version as part of doing that shadow work. I hope that answered your question, or at least started a conversation around that area.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have 3 more participants. We have Susania Jones, who has several questions to you. So Susania, I will open your microphone and you will be able to ask directly. The microphone is open, Susania.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Susania.
Thank you so much. This has been a great presentation. I have some questions because I think I've been involved in shadow work and not known that's what it was called. I'm a creative writer. I write fiction, but I've always felt a tension between my creative outlets and being an academic. And I'm wondering, do you have any suggestions or guides on where I can go on how to, I guess, meld the two, or draw some kind of bridge between the two so there's not so much of a tension between the shadow work and the academic work? And then my next question is, how do I begin to incorporate this kind of mindfulness and shadow work into my teaching so that I'm also teaching that in my qualitative classes?
Both are very good questions, and both have very weird and singular and essentialist answer to something that I'm saying that could be generative. So there's the paradox. I would say start where you are at, so start instead of trying to read some other people's work to do this, I think you should trust your own sense of bridging, because it bridges in your mind and your body and your spirit in some way, the creative parts of it and the shadow parts of it. Because if you look at someone else's work, I mean, you can, and of course you will, because you're an academic, so you're going to go and look at similar work, so you will do that anyway. But I think what I have learned in this process is that nobody was doing the work the way I was doing, and the only way I was able to do it the way I was doing. Now, there are people who are doing contemplative work, there are people who are doing decolonizing work, there are people who are doing creative work, but the combination of the 3 that I am doing that makes sense for me came from me to do the work that resonated with my being in a very authentic way that I can live with and work with and present and share and feel that this is in flow with me. So I think that you already know in some parts of you that there is a bridge between the kind of shadow work that you're doing without languaging it that, and the kind of creative calls that you're getting or inspirations that you're getting. So you should develop a practice perhaps every day to sit down and engage with it and see what comes out of it. So it could be a practice of walking, it could be a practice of meditating, it could be a practice of writing, it could be a practice of doodling, it could be a practice of just sitting quietly. Whatever the practice is that you feel like it would be a practice that will bring some sense of stillness, some sense of regrouping and centering to you, engage in that practice and see how it comes together for you. And as it comes together for you, then that will reveal to you what needs to happen in your classroom. Because what I understood was that my students mirrored back to me exactly where I was in my practice. So if I was resisting my practice, then I found the students were more in resistance of it. If I was more in flow with my practice, I found my students were mirroring that as well. So I find my students to be very good teachers to me in terms of how they are teaching me things that I need to learn. So I don't know that there is a technicality that you need to master as much as mastering your own knowledge, as much as mastering that which is already in you and tapping into that through a process of stillness.
Thank you very much. And we have two more participants. Would you mind just in 2-3 minutes to answer both of the questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much. So, Catherine, I will open your microphone. The microphone is open.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm in Nova Scotia in Canada, and so grateful to have participated in this because you're exactly what I needed to hear today. So, thanks. I just started my sabbatical last week, and you said the words that have absolutely captured my experience, which is cultivate awareness of your depletion. And that's so perfect for how I've been feeling. My two questions are this. I was curious about what's the area of study or areas of study of the students that you're working with. And the reason I ask that is I work with students who are studying nutrition. About 60% of them are interested in becoming registered dietitians. So when you talked about resisting the whole idea of I want you to do some contemplative, creative something related to the work that you're doing, and how are you going to work with other people who aren't like you for the most part and are in serious health difficulties, right? That's very difficult kind of emotional work. And so I really want them to get ready for that. And well, that sounds way too powerful a statement, but I really want them to be aware of how emotionally draining their work will be and get, and help yourself. Yeah. They really resist this whole idea of I'm a creative person. And so I'm curious how you help them to overcome that resistance. And then the second thing I just can't help but ask you, which is how on earth do you find so much time to write? Because I can't find that time. So I'm curious how you do it.
Okay, well, I honestly don't think I write as much as I need to. I feel extremely guilty, and I think I should write at least 2 times more than what I'm writing. So thank you for saying that. I'll address it in a moment. I'll take the first question first. So, one of the things that I've learned in doing this work is to respect the people's agency that come into my classroom. My students are generally students from the College of Education, but I also have some sociology students and some nutritionists also come to my class too. I teach qualitative research methods. So by design, it draws a lot of interdisciplinary audience anyway. So I'm not always an expert in their subject matter area, but I am a guide in terms of helping them how to think about inquiry, So how do I cultivate an authentic inquirer within them? And how do I help them sustain their inner resources as they go about their inquiry? That's essentially what I am teaching them. And then as a result of what I'm teaching them, I'm allowing them to build up their capacities to do the work, because within the class it becomes a microcosm, because we get into stuck places in classes and we get into things that are not pleasant for them. Like it's not like they all come and they love my class or anything. I have resistance and students resist the creative portions of it. So a lot of times I just have to have a lot of generosity to understand that the resistance is resistance within their own programming, within their own conditioning, within their own prior experiences. So I'm generous and I generously accept those resistances, and I don't even expect them to overcome it. That's the other part of it. I value it, so I model it, and I have a lot of enthusiasm for it. And I hope that that enthusiasm is contagious enough that they would want to play with it some, and so I don't have assignments where I value the quality of the work based on the aesthetic of the art that they do. So I invite them to take a journey with me where the creativity is this journey to see what they had learned about whatever it is that we are doing by taking a creative approach. And I would tell them, if you don't find an insight, that's okay. At least we did this and at least we have this experience. And then I also expose them to some traditional ways of doing some things too. And some students land in the traditional space, some students land in the creative space, some students do some sort of hybridization of creative ways of doing things and traditional ways of doing things. And I understood that to mean that I'm respecting the way they need to do this journey. So one of the things then I tell them, or I hope they walk away with, is to respect the agency of the students, where they're at, and that the fact that they may not come to the point where I want them to be. And that means that I have to accept that when I don't reach every student exactly the way I'd like to reach them, that is not a failure on their part and it's not a failure on my part. That we're both agentic in our position, and it reflects what we can do in that moment, in that interaction, from our places of consciousness. So that's how I have dealt with that. So if your students are going into the world and there are possibilities of people who will come from very dark places for their nutritional purposes, I think it's the building capacity piece of it, building capacity and compassion, that some of your students will just have to hold space and see what unfolds, and in that unfolding, some will take a journey with them where they will take them, and some will just still have to work out things before they can take the journey, and we may not be able to bear witness to that. Like I may not be able to bear witness to a student taking a journey that I wanted them to take when they're in my class. They're probably taking it like 5 years later or never taking it, and just be okay with that too. So that's the awareness that I'm trying to cultivate in my students, and an awareness of restoring and replenishing themselves as they do the work. Because any work we do, any energy we work with is some of them will be in alignment, and some of them will be very challenging energies. So it's how do we meet those energies and not get depleted ourselves when we do this work. So that's the first part. That's the answer to your first part of your question. The second part is I try, and I don't know that I do this very well, but I try to protect a writing time during the week, like at least a day of writing time during the week. And I try to write at least 10 to 15 minutes a day in the morning, if not a little bit more. And then each semester, I go on a writing retreat with my students, and then I do a writing retreat in summer with my students. And now I have started hosting professional writing retreats for any faculty that can come from anywhere. And I just finished doing one at Zion National Park in Utah. And I actually had 2 faculty members from Canada come. One was in her sabbatical who attended the writing retreat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kakali. I'm sure that all of us, we are very inspired and we have learned a lot. Unfortunately, we are right now out of time, but maybe there is a way to reach you, and maybe there are a few more questions. Maybe those participants can write you directly and discussing, reflecting, and having a dialogue with you. So they can read through ResearchGate, right?
they can do research grades. And if you have my email address on the site, then they can email me directly as well.
Great. So thank you very much. It was amazing and great pleasure to have you today. And before we finish, I would like just to ask Yvette, maybe you have a few announcements to say about IIQM before we finish?
Perfect. Yes, and thank you, Kakali. That was a great presentation. Just to let all of you know that the Masterclass webinar series is a monthly series. You can go to our website, iiqm.ualberta.ca, to register for next month's webinar, and that'll be on August 24th, and that's with Linda Amanqua, and her topic is Trustworthiness, Keeping the Path Clear. So hopefully we'll all see you next month.
Thank you very much, Yvette. And from my side, I would like to invite you maybe to explore about ATLAS.ti. ATLAS.ti is a software that facilitates qualitative data analysis. So if you're willing to do a literature review or you have to analyze data qualitatively, so maybe you can just open ATLAS.ti official website and explore our free webinars. We offer every week a bunch of free webinars in different languages, in Spanish, English, and other languages. So just invite to explore, and who knows, maybe you will like and take advantage of this software. And finally, I would just ask Kakali to say goodbye, everyone, and we hope to meet again with you very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Kakali. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.